Hello from MWC 2024. I'm here together with Max Cuvellier Giacomelli, Head of Mobile for Development GSMA. Hello, Max.
Hi, how are you?
Good, and you?
Very good.
Perfect.
Very happy to be here.
Great. Max, Africa is a mobile-first continent, as we learned, so 50% of the population is below 30, so it's a huge potential. So based on your latest report, if you check the mobile internet connectivity report you published for 2023, what would you say are the key barriers that we have when we look at how can we connect the unconnected?
Yep, it's a very good point. And usually there's a misconception that the biggest barrier is around connectivity. There is still 15% of the population in Africa who is not connected by a mobile internet network, but 85% of the population is. The biggest issue that we're facing is a usage gap, which is basically the majority of the population who is connected today, who could be using, is not using. And the two main barriers are the affordability of handsets that remain still too expensive for quite a big part of the population. And the second one is around digital skills.
Okay, so if you look at affordability, would you say it's affordability because there is, let's say, no money, or it's probably people don't want to afford it because they don't see the actual usage of the mobile device?
That's a very good question. It's actually both. Actually, the third barrier that we've identified is also like the relevance of the service. If people don't understand what they can do with the mobile internet, if they just think that it's about going on Facebook, for instance, they will not make the investment. But there's still a big issue on the cost of the handset itself, and it's mostly about making that big lump payment that people are not able to do. Like if you have to pay $100 for a good quality, like high-end feature phone or like lower-end smartphone, a lot of people can't afford $100 lump sum. What they could afford though is maybe $10 and then $5 on a monthly basis while they use it to repay it. So there are a lot of solutions in that area around like fractioning payments to make handsets more affordable.
Is this something what you already see implemented in some countries?
Yes, yeah. We'll see it across Africa. It's in a lot of markets, it's still a kind of testing level. It is hard because, as you can imagine, anyone can disappear with a smartphone. There's no collateral. So a lot of organizations are trying to learn from what was done in the solar home system pay-as-you-go space, for instance. But in that space, you know where people live. With a smartphone, someone could come and kind of tell you where they are and then disappear with the smartphone. So you need to find some kind of proxy of trust to avoid like default. So there's an example in Kenya, for instance. Safaricom has done it working with partners, including M-Kopa. And basically what they use as a proxy is someone who have been using their mobile money, their M-Pesa account for at least 6 months. Because you assume that if they've transacted enough and basically their mobile number, their SIM, their identity is linked to their wallet, it's not so likely that they'll be willing to lose all of that just to save a few bucks on a stolen handset.
So kind of a digital track record is needed.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I mean, your work also consists for other markets. So how would you see the progress we made in Africa or the issues when we talk especially about the usage gap towards other low-income countries, areas?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So on the coverage gap, it is still higher in Africa than in the rest of the world. Globally, it's about 5% of the population. In Africa, it's 15%. So half of the 400 million people around the world who are not connected with mobile internet today live in Africa. But on the usage gap, it's the same. The percentage in Africa much higher than in other regions. I see this as an opportunity. It means that there's still a lot of growth possible, and with the right handset financing, the right like digital skills training, the right services for users, we can still see double-digit growth for quite a while across the continent. And in terms of other trends, I think what we're seeing a lot is local innovation addressing local problems. In the climate tech space, for instance, you see maybe like in more like not in low-income countries, you will see people focusing more on like mitigation and so on. In Africa, we see a lot of really good use cases around climate adaptation and resilience, for instance. We just announced our latest cohort of startups that we'll be working with, and 5 of them are in Africa and working on like new solutions, sometimes integrating IoT, sometimes integrating AI to like help reduce food waste, for instance, with Price Barley in Nigeria, or help provide smallholder farmers with solutions that will help them like build a stronger income and be better prepared for climate shocks.
All right. I mean, one big advantage of the GSMA is you have the opportunity to bring together the private and the public sector through your events, through your, let's say, activities. What do you see the right awareness on the governmental side to change certain aspects? When we talk about affordability, can also be, okay, the taxation is way too high for the mobile devices, services too high, infrastructure is not given, or operator has to pay too much. If you look at South Africa, how much the operator pays just to, let's say, keep towers alive through electricity.
Yeah, so I mean, the way we see it is we have to work with governments. I mean, mobile operators are local entities. They have to comply with local rules, local taxation and so on. So the approach of the industry is to work with the government to identify, we're not anti-taxation. What we want is the taxation to be first applied to everybody evenly, but also be proportionate so that it serves the purpose of financing the governments and the states, but also at the same time allows the private sector to grow and deliver those services. So we've done a lot on looking at universal service funds, for instance, where hundreds of millions of dollars are sitting today, and just work with governments on how to best use that money to reduce the coverage and the usage gap. There's a lot also around regulation for mobile money, where you kind of have an element of telco regulation, you have an element of central bank regulation, and they are one of our key stakeholders because we want to understand how do we make sure that the taxation and the regulation are enabling. And we think good things, like for instance, proportionate KYC for mobile money access. This has enabled the growth of mobile money in Africa. If anyone who wanted access to a mobile money account needed to have the same kind of documents as to open a bank account, mobile money would not exist today.
Yeah.
So we've got quite a few good cases, and when we can work hand in hand with the public sector, it usually works really well.
It's always good to look in the past to understand how optimistic we can be for the future.
Yeah.
From your perspective, your personal perspective, do you think we made the right progress over the last year? The awareness, I mean, could we raise the awareness? Did change really happen?
It is. I mean, I started in this industry, mostly focused on Africa 15 years ago. I don't know if you remember, that was a complete different world. Mobile internet did not exist. Yes, we still had 2 double-digit growth and so on, but that was on really basic services that were mostly reaching urban areas and so on. I feel like now there is a network. 85% of the population is big. There is potential. There are enough services and so on. And I think there's also an understanding, a shared understanding that we need to work together to get to that level of inclusion. So we know today that women in Africa are more than 20% less likely than men to use the mobile internet. That's wrong. We know that there's a big gap between rural areas and urban areas. We've identified all of those. We know that someone who doesn't have an official proof of ID in some markets might not even be able to have a mobile money account. So we've identified all those gaps, and we've seen in a few markets private sector, public sector work together in finding solutions and so on. And so there's also a general feeling of kind of looking at what your neighbor is doing, and not so much as in a competitive way, but more as okay, this market is doing something right. I mean, everybody looked at Kenya, for instance, and the growth of M-Pesa, which was enabled by the central bank issuing letters of no objection in the beginning while things were being set up like this is now, we see it replicating in other areas in the dialogue between the public and the private sector in particular.
So you think there will be a fruitful future for Africa?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be doing this job otherwise if I didn't believe in it, yeah.
That's good. I just would like to talk about the last point. I mean, MWC Barcelona, big topic is AI.
Yep.
How do you see AI as a crucial role to, let's say, bring more efficiency in development in Africa, and even to probably upskill people quicker?
Yeah, so there's a lot in AI, and what we're trying to do is kind of focus on the areas of AI where we really think as an industry, and in particular for my team on the more development and impact side of things, we can change things. I mean, generative AI is having massive impacts everywhere. And we're seeing it with some of the startups we work with, for instance, that are trying to use generative AI to translate the content to deliver advisory servicing for farmers into their local languages, not just the main languages spoken in the country. Or we work with a startup in Pakistan called Orenda that is an edtech startup, and now they've integrated AI to basically create more education content because it can really help grow but the amount and the speed at which you're working. What we're particularly interested in is looking at mobile big data and what the industry can provide. There are a lot of skills, but there's also like a lot of data out there. There's a responsibility to manage that data in the right way that operators like have to fulfill and have to commit to. And it's basically looking at how you can use those data sets, maybe coupled with new data coming from IoT sensors or satellite data, and just see how do you use that to look at solutions or helping people who are building solutions to have a positive socioeconomic impact or work on climate resilience, for instance.
All right. Thank you very much. It's very insightful.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time. There was Tech Africa News from MWC 24. You can find more on techafricanews.com.